Hey, this is Al. It's week 7. It's New York. New York School poetry. New York School writers. New York, New York. The greatest city in the world, I must say, right? Isn't it?
Yes.
Yes. Hemingway once said of New York, someday this is going to be a great town. With his usual virulent irony. Anyway, welcome to the New York School, but we're in Philadelphia, and we got some good friends here. First of all, Jason. Hello, Jason. We have Andrew. And we have here at the table Dan Bergman himself. Yeah, Dan is here. Welcome back, Dan and Michael. And we have Lainey Brown here. Hello, Lainey. Not a surprise that you're here, but it's great. Kate Colby. This is Kate Week.
Oh.
This is good, but you got to talk into the mic. You all have to talk.
Hey,
into
it's
the
Kate Week.
Hello, Kate. In Kate Week, you're here doing all kinds of cool things. We just made a couple of new ModPo Plus videos, you and I, in the studio. And tomorrow you're back. Maybe you'll sit in on our class tomorrow, ModPo class, and then we're going to do a poem talk about a poem by Lewis Warsh. Kate, so glad to have you here.
Thank you.
And Sophia DuRose. Hello, Sophia. Do you want to...
What's up?
What's up? Erica Kaufman is here. Hello, Erica. Good to see you.
Hi, everyone.
Max is here from Berlin. It is now 9 p.m., mid-evening for Max. And Gabby is here from Chicago. Gabby, we missed you.
Hello.
Hello. It's good to see you again.
It's
and Dave Poplar is here. We also have here in the room who will make appearances variously. We have Joe, we have Meredith, we have Sanvi, and we have Tina. Hello to all of you. Okay, what we're going to do is we're going to go around and everybody is going to put in a favorite poem from this week. I'm not going to write them down, but you'll remember them. Favorite poem. And then we're going to use a special die. A special die. Zach, can we get a close-up on this die? There it is. Okay, this is a weird die. Why is it weird? Zach, do you have a mic? What's the story with this die?
Al, it was just born that way.
What? I literally
Why
don't
is it
understand.
weird? It was
Okay.
just born that way.
Okay, well, anyway, this is a die with 12 sides. Now, there are 13 people, so somebody's getting screwed, but that's okay. Yeah? We've been looking for something like this. This is very exciting. So then we'll roll the die, and and the person who comes up on the die, you're going to look for a 14, huh? We'll get to talk about the poem you suggested. Gabby, a lot of gamification has gone on since you were last with us.
It seems like it. We're in Dungeons and Dragons territory.
Is that what this is about? Okay. All right. But first, a couple of announcements. That's me, isn't it? Okay. Couple of announcements. Please give us a call, 610-616-3208, 610-616-3208, or Skype ModPo Pen. Pen has 2 N's in it. And the first caller is going to get a copy of this book by Lainey Brown. And this book is titled Everyone and Her Resemblances, and it gives me the opportunity to proudly announce that on Tuesday, October 22nd at 6 p.m., Lainey Brown will be here. We're going to be celebrating this book. We're also going to have here at the Writers' House an exhibit in our gallery concordant with this book. And Lainey will be giving a reading, and it will be streaming. All you have to do at that time is go to the Kelly Writers' House YouTube page, and you will find the live stream. Hope you'll join us for that. Congratulations, Lainey Brown. And we are giving this away to the first caller, and then subsequent callers are going to get a copy of T. de los Reyes, this book called And Yet Held. We have some copies that T sent to us. So give us a call today. And I think that's all in the way of announcements. So now let's go to Jason first, and Max will be on deck. Favorite poem, very quickly. We've got a lot of people here.
I'd say for this week, this year, it would be Hard Times by Ashbery. All the
I love that poem.
Ashbery, but that one feels to be resonant with our own hard times.
Absolutely. That's such a great poem. I don't think we've talked about that enough in previous years. Okay, who did I say was on deck? Max. Max is up and Gabby is on deck. Favorite poem?
So many good ones. We had a great conversation in my office hours yesterday about O'Hara, but I'm going to go ahead and shout out Ashbury as well, just walking around.
Yeah, I love that poem. Beautiful poem. Gabby is up and Dan Bergman is on deck.
February by James Schuyler.
And why do you love that one so?
I think it's gorgeous and very ordinary, and it does some really weird things with the word "it." And that's
Yes, at the end. Yes, we're gonna. If we get to talk, if the die leads us to talking about it, we'll definitely talk about it. Dan Bergman is up, and Tina is on deck. Need a mic, Tina.
Dan says,
Oh, you need to talk
Thanks.
into the mic, Michael.
okay, take a moment. Dan says, thanks for including me. And his poem is Variations on a Theme by William Carlos Williams.
Oh, yes. Okay, good. That's cool. All right. Tina is up, and Kate is on deck.
Mine's is John Ashbery's Some Trees.
Why do you like Some Trees, Tina?
Personally, I love trees, and I think this does a beautiful job of explaining the simplicity of why people love them and need them.
Fantastic. And did I put somebody on deck? I don't think I did. Kate. Kate's up. Sophia's on deck.
Well, it's actually Ashbury week, it seems.
Wow.
I think at Jason's suggestion, my office hour had an incredible discussion about hard times this week, so I'm going to put that out there.
Two
too.
votes for hard times. Okay, great. Sophia is up. Erica is on deck.
Well, because Some Trees has already been spoken about, I'm going to put in Invasion of the Body Snatchers, Bernadette Mayer.
Bernadette Mayer. Okay, that's very cool. Erica is up. Lainey is on deck.
Mount St. Helens, Eileen Miles.
Why do you pick that one?
I'm sort of obsessed with the craft of the poem and how it's working as an elegy.
Love it. Okay, great. Lainey is up, and Dave Poplar's on deck.
I'm going to shout out to a new ModPo Plus Bernadette poem called Yellow Orange because in the recording she says it's her favorite poem.
Did she really? She didn't do that very often, I don't think. So that's legit. Okay, Dave is up, and Meredith is on. Meredith, do you want to take a turn? No. Sanvi is on deck. So Dave, then Sanvi.
I was going to say Invasion of the Body Snatchers, but since that was already said, I'm going to say 20 by Barbara Guest, which I think is amazing.
Oh, I love that poem. 20 is such a good poem. So good. Okay, so Sanvi's up and Andrew's on deck.
I'm going to say...
Push the little button.
I'm going to say The Instruction Manual by John Ashbery. I think Some Trees is really good, but I think this one is also really beautiful.
Fantastic. Andrew's up and Joe is on deck.
I choose The Blue Stairs by Barbara Guest.
Wow. Are you generally a Barbara Guest fan, Andrew?
Yeah.
And why would you say that?
Because she's a very good poet. I think in general, the sort of spatiality of her work is very interesting and generative to me.
Beautiful. Okay, great. And so Joe is up and Drew is on deck.
I'm going to choose Writing by Eileen Miles.
Why?
Because when I read it, it reminded me a lot of how I feel when I try to write, and I just thought it was really beautiful.
Fantastic. And we need a mic to Drew, and then we're going to roll the dice somehow. Favorite poem?
Oh, it has to be Some Trees by John Ashbery.
And why?
I don't know. It just describes a way I would like to live, I feel like. I just resonated with it a lot, and the language is like so intricately like beautiful and like creative. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to roll the die with... is there really one with 20? Oh, there is. Okay. Well, we only go up to 15, but here we go. Who wants to do it? Kate? It's Kate week. Does this thing actually stay in one spot? 15.
Nope, 16.
There is no 16. Zach, it's a flaw.
All right. 19.
19. There is no 19.
All right. Nope. 6.
6. That would be Sophia Duros. Which one did you pick?
Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
Okay, Invasion of the Body Snatchers. All right, good. Fantastic. Sophia, get us started. And while you're doing that, I'm going to cue up the Bernadette's reading of the poem.
You want me to just say anything
say
about it?
Say something that you like about it.
Well, I think I really appreciate the play with time. I think there's this nod to just plain time, and I kind of feel like in a world, in a life where like there's always a demand. There's always like the next thing to do, the next day to think about, the next appointment you have, the next election coming up. And I think poetry can be a way to occupy time in not even necessarily a productive way, just in a joyful way.
Mm-hmm.
And I like that the poem enacts. I like that the poem demands we enjoy the time we have with it, just by existing.
Thank you. I'm going to play Bernadette performing the poem, and then I'm going to ask Dan. Who else suggested this poem? Wave, if you did. Dave Poplar and Jason. So I'm going to ask Dan, Dave, and Jason to comment after hearing the poem. Let me just get this right. Dan, Dave, and Jason. Okay, here's Bernadette.
Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Moon out and no snow yet, November 1st, the first anniversary of our wedding and the day before Election Day, 1976. Yesterday was Halloween. Next Friday I have an appointment with the dentist. And the following Tuesday is Louis's 32nd birthday. Exactly 1 week after that, Marie will be 11 months old. The day before yesterday we turned the clocks back 1 hour, which made it seem like every day will have an extra hour in it, not only of darkness but of just plain time. The time I used to spend skipping lunch is longer. The time for dinner is too early now. The time for sunset comes too soon. The time between dinner and Marie's bedtime is too long. When it's time to go to bed, there's still a few hours left to read. I'm dreaming twice as much as before. I spend all my new time lying in bed thinking. Last night I saw Invasion of the Body Snatchers, and tonight when I came into my room to go to work, I found an old seed pod on the floor by my desk. In the movie, if you see one of these, it's time to die. It's time to write some letters. Good cold air comes in my window. It wakes me up. We had a bottle of champagne, and Marie went to sleep without crying. It's time to read Fielding's Guide to European Travel and the Alice Toklas Cookbook again. A few books by John McPhee, our new American Heritage Anniversary Dictionary, The Adventures of a Mathematician by Stanislav Ulam, and The Wild Boy of Averone by a behaviorist psychologist about a boy brought up by wolves.
Okay, so before we turn to Dan first, I want to ask Lainey and Sophia to keep an eye on the comment stream in YouTube. And Dave Poplar, will you look at the webcast subforum thread? And again, before we turn to Dan, I wonder if Lainey, Sophia, you find something exciting going on in the chat. And I'm going to remind everybody that your copy of Lainey Brown's book is available to you if you call 610-616-3208. Okay, Sophia, what do we got?
So we have some people chiming in about time in this poem. Laura Littman said, it makes me think of the way that parents, mostly women, keep the whole of the family calendar in their heads, all things large and small.
Cool. Lainey?
Miranda Jebb says, right now it is making me think of having to keep multiple schedules and appointments of family members in one's head at all times.
Fantastic. And Dave, are there some comments or questions relevant to this discussion so far?
Not specifically about this poem.
Okay, so we'll come back to you. Dan Bergman, your thoughts on this poem?
Dan says she loves to give herself permission to associate and ends up with an impossible list of books to read, which reminds me of what it's like to study with Jason.
What a perfect setup for Jason. Thank you, Dan. Jason, you want to follow up on that, and then we'll turn to Dave Poplar.
Dan, I've got like 28 more to read by next week if you want to take a challenge. This poem, like, because I have Hard Times by Ashbery in the brain, I'm thinking about them in juxtaposition, and the kind of ominousness of Hard Times would seem quite different from this poem, but to me they, like, on one end and the other end are kind of a spectrum of if we figured out a place for Barbara Guest, the spectrum of the New York School. But like what also strikes me at the end, the last three books are the Dictionary, The Adventures of a Mathematician, and The Wild Boy of Aveyron, which I believe was made into a movie by Francois Truffaut. And it's about a boy, because he's raised by wolves, is taken in, and never can learn language. He is without language. So we have these words that turn into numbers, that turn into kind of cries beyond language or before language, which is also reminds me of the last scene of Invasion of the Body Snatchers, because the difference between the pod people and our beloved heroes is that the pod people ends with Donald Sutherland pointing at someone and making this horrible non-language sound.
Yeah.
So in the dailiness of the Mayor poem, there's also this strange undertow of a threat of a kind of loss or collapse of language.
Fantastic. Thank you. Great. Appreciate that. Okay, Dave Poplar, your thought briefly on this poem?
I love poems about the crushing weight of suburban family life, like in Danse Russe and things like that. And I think this really captures it. But I also think that it's amazingly hopeful. Right when the seed pod part comes in, it seems to me like a turn. I saw it, and when you see one of these, it's time to die. And then the poem talks about it's time to live, it's flourishing. So it seems like it begins with this crushing weight of just quotidian life and ends with the ability to flourish among that. So it's really hopeful to me.
Gabby, can you say anything about why it's relevant that this was 1976?
Oh, I was thinking about Jason mentions the Donald Sutherland version, which, by the way,
which is the 70s version, yeah.
But it did come out in 78, and so she's probably watching the 50s version, which is like
definitely
first more boring, but it's a lot heavier handed in a kind of anti-communist allegory.
Yeah,
like
the pod people are commies that are going to take over our minds, brainwashing.
Yeah, if the 70s one is kind of like kind of anti-conformity or watching people all become kind of this one sort of nonverbal hive mind, like the 50s one is like, oh, all your neighbors are being transformed by an evil source. So it's this very Cold War politics movie. And so the poem says 76 and it's facing that election. So I'm curious, I imagine that that's where we're going. And, Bernadette Mayer was a communist poet and thought a lot about these kinds of issues. So there's a paranoia to that one that I think is relevant.
Yeah, totally. Cool, very cool. It looks like do we have somebody on the phone, Chris? All right, let's disrupt everything and turn to the phone and see what happens. Who do we have?
Yes, Al. Anthony Watkins is on the line.
Anthony.
He has a comment this week about New York and the beats.
Hi, Anthony.
Hello.
Hey, how you feeling?
I'm feeling pretty good. I do want the book, but I actually had something to say this week.
Wait, say that again?
I'm really looking forward to getting Lainey's book.
Oh, you called
But
to get
what I
the
wanted to
book.
say-
Okay, Anthony Watkins, this is your book, and I'll ask Lainey to inscribe it for you. How about that?
Please.
Okay, good.
Please, that'd be great.
Good. All right, fantastic.
All right. Yeah, there's a little something coming for you and Lainey and Sophia, so keep your eye out on the mailbox.
Okay, thank you, man. All right, take care of yourself, all right?
But what I wanted to say was,
Yeah.
for me, week 7 is so great because we're done with the beats.
Okay. All right.
I love moving into New York instead of the beats, but everybody to their own.
Thank you. Appreciate that. All right. Thank you, Anthony Watkins. Fantastic. Okay. And we only have one line still. I don't know why Zach and Chris haven't figured it out, but it's 610-616-3208. Kate, roll the die. And we'll see what other poem can come up. 16? Nope.
It's weighted.
What's wrong with you?
11, 16, 11?
11. And that is Joe. Joe, grab the mic. Let's get the mic to Joe.
Okay.
What's your choice?
Writing.
Writing. Okay. I think you should make a comment, and then I'll play Eileen Miles.
Okay. Let me pull it up.
Performing writing. Is it at the main syllabus?
That's what I'm wondering.
It's in
It's
Modpo
Modpo Plus.
Okay.
Sorry.
No, that's fine. Got it. You want to say something?
Sure. I think my favorite part about this poem is the likening of a poem to tiny pieces of Band-Aids. And I just love that image because, a Band-Aid is kind of gross. It's not this like glorious thing. It's like, it's not romanticizing poetry. It's just, it's kind of, an everyday, like kind of daily object, but it's also like disgusting and it's small. And it's like, that's how I think of like thoughts turning into poetry. It's not this smooth, beautiful process. It's very scabby in that sense. And so I really liked that imagery.
Love that. Okay, great. I'm going to play the poem, and then I'm going to ask Kate, Erica, and Max to comment on it. Okay, in any way they like. All right, here is Eileen Miles.
Writing. I can connect any two things. That's God. Teeny piece of Band-Aid, little folded piece of Band-Aid. I ran to the bathroom to see my face. Sometimes I don't want to see my face in the mirror. Sometimes I can't bear my thoughts. Sometimes I can't do anything. But that's okay. Band-Aid, book, God. That's right.
That's Eileen Miles. I think I'm going to call on Erica, Max, and Kate. Am I right? Are those the three I said? Okay. Erica first.
This is like one of the best meta poems in the world.
Why is that?
Because I think it's actually enacting the thing that it's talking about. Mm-hmm. So by virtue of saying I can connect any two things, that's God, teeny piece of Band-Aid, et cetera. It's, they're narrating something that they're doing or experiencing that connects to the act of making a poem, where you're ultimately, at least for me in my process, I'm often writing to discover. So I don't know exactly what the poem is going to be telling me until I'm in the process of writing. And I feel like that's something that this poem is also doing, where it's foregrounding the idea that surprising connections happen on the page.
Yes. Beautifully put. And Max, I know you had something else you were going to say, but let me just throw this in. The beginning of the poem suggests a certain confidence or writerly egotism. I can do this. I can do anything. And that might be faux confidence at first, because clearly they are not so sure about how they look in the mirror, and maybe there's a little lack of confidence. You want to go with that?
Yeah, it's part of the way that this poem enacts what it's talking about, right? I mean, Eileen Miles takes us on this almost emotional roller coaster ride, right? In this very short period, from confidence to self-doubt, and then back to this divine moment, right, where we end with God. And I think that there's I think in a way, if we think about this in the larger context of the New York School, if we think of this in terms of the I do this, I do that poems of Frank O'Hara, it's somewhat refreshing to get this sort of performance of doubt and self-doubt that this poem does, and to sort of think about that alongside what seems to be often a more confident poetic process that we encounter in something like Frank O'Hara's I Do This, I Do That poems, right? Where you don't really get the sense immediately that Frank O'Hara is doubts about what this poetic process can do.
Right, no doubts
Whereas
at all.
Eileen Miles is saying ultimately that they think that, yeah, they're going to get there, they're going to connect the two things, but it's not always as simple as it seems. That being on the page, doing that connecting, it's painful. You know, you need Band-Aids, right? It's
It's really cool. Kate, you should be invited to say whatever you want, particularly because this is Kate Week. But I'm just going to throw in this idea that comes from what Max just said. In my own mind, I could be totally wrong. I think there's what might be called true or honest metapoetry. This is an example of it. I need to be writing about my writing because I'm not sure I can pull this off, and I can pull this off, and I'm going to keep trying to do it, that kind of thing that Eileen does so well. And then there might be what, like falsely modest metapoetry, and certainly O'Hara fits that. O'Hara saying, I'm going to do metapoetry because it's a really good style that I kind of helped to invent, so here's an example. Anyway, I don't know how you feel about that, but go anywhere with this.
I think what's strange and crazy about this poem is she throws God in there. They render themselves God in the process of writing the poem, while at the same time they can't do anything, they can't stand their thoughts, they can't stand their appearance. So the theological implications of what they're saying, that God connects all things, and here I am being and doing that thing right here is incredible.
The analogy to God of writers, let's say in the 18th century novel, English novel, I mean, all the novelists thought of themselves as a deistic situation where they put together this fabulous structure of a fiction, and they were godlike. And that was a very open analogy. That went away in subsequent centuries, and in a way comes back through something like a poem by Eileen Miles saying, power, we can do this. Our imaginations. I think Dickinson has the same power, Volcanoes Be in Sicily. Okay, that is fantastic. Thank you. So we're going to look at the comment stream, and then we're going to break rank, and we're going to ask Dan and Michael to play a pre-recorded statement that Dan has made about one of the poems for this week. So what do we got in the stream?
Let's see.
Is it busy?
It's busy. I'm trying to figure out
Are people happy?
People are talking about multiple things at the same time. Like
they can do that.
Yeah. Talking about the incorporation of Sophia's cereal says,
oh, love that poem.
Our Sophia. Wait, where did that
So
conversation start?
Laura said, I'm thinking about the one about cereal, so I offered the name.
Okay. That's a good one. We could throw that into the mix. Okay, Kathy says, many of this week's poems explore time and or mention dream time, a different experience of time from waking time. Eileen Miles' writing repeats sometimes.
Very nice. Sophia, anything to add?
Well, Jane offered that connecting can also be painful.
How so?
I don't know what Jane meant.
Well,
but
how would you mean it? That's Jane Ward, I imagine. Thank you, Jane Ward.
Yes. I mean,
Michael's laughing at me for knowing the last names of everybody.
I think just my first thought would be in the poem writing, Eileen Miles is kind of finding a refuge in like unique configurations and connecting God and Band-Aid and book. And there's a painfulness to looking at their own face in the mirror and seeing something that you see every day, and it's more
Mm.
exciting and
Mm.
cathartic to connect a Band-Aid and a book than to find comfort in like what they find in the mirror. And so that's a connection too, to see yourself in the mirror and recognize it as you.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful, thank you. Okay, I'm going to throw a curveball and deny the die, because I was made to. It was like the die was cast for me to deny the die. I'm going to turn to Dan, and I'm going to ask Michael to play a avatar voice reading something that Dan wrote before arriving today about the amazing, maybe my favorite poem of this week, 20, by Barbara Guest. And I'm going to ask Andrew, Lainey, and Gabby to comment on what Dan says. And I'm going to do something even more risky, which, not that that was risky. If the person, is there someone on the phone? Okay, I'm going to ask this poor innocent person who's called to comment on Dan on 20, and 20 is a hard poem. Let's see who we've got. What do we have there? Chris Martin.
We have our friend Pascal on the phone.
Pascal. Okay, cool. You mean Al Pascal? Oh, good.
Can we hear the poem?
Yeah, I think we need to hear the poem, but I'm trying to get the sequencing right.
Okay.
Al, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Hello. So I'm throwing you a
Hi.
curveball. I'm asking you to listen to Barbara Guest recite 20, the Dreamtime poem. Then we're going to listen to Dan Bergman comment on it. And then Andrew, Lainey, Gabby, and you will comment on the comment. Are you cool?
Yeah, I think I can follow.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, so I am going to 20, but if you just search 20 in the ModPo Plus site, you get a lot of things. So let's see, how do I do this? Oh, there it is. I got it. Okay. So I think Poetry Foundation has an audio. There it is. All right, I'm going to play the poem, then we're going to hear Dan.
20. Sleep is 20, remembering the insignificant flamenco dancer in Granada who became important as you watch the mountain ridge, the dry hills. What an idiotic number. Sleep is 20. It certainly isn't 20 sheep. There weren't that many in the herd under the cold crest of Sierra Nevada. It's more like 20 Madison Avenue buses while I go droning away at my dream life. Each episode is important, that's what it is. Sequences. I've got going a 20-act drama, the theater of the active. The critics are surely there, even the actors, even the flowers presented on stage, even the wildflowers picked by the wife of the goatherd each morning early while I sleep under the snow cane of Sierra Nevada. Yellow caps like castanets. I reach into my bouquet half dreaming and count 20 yellow-capped heads. Flowers clicking 20 times because they like to repeat themselves, as I do, as does the morning or the drama when hopes will be acted many times, as even these dreams in similar people's heads. 20 castanets.
Wow, that is such a great poem. Okay, Dan Bergman, let's hear what you have to say about it, and then we'll turn to Andrew first.
First, about the previous poem, Dan typed out, somehow God and book seem to go together. So I started to think about Band-Aids, and I realized that Band-Aids come into play when the wounds are small but distracting.
Wow, Dan. Amazing. Thank you.
Now, about 20.
Technology by Michael.
Beginning with 20 is a deliberate thwarting of the meaning and insight that using a word instead of a number would provide, like sleep is necessary, impossible, elusive, healing, or dangerous. Then Guest tries to recover from having used a number instead of a word, so the poem chronicles the struggle between using expected words and this kind of poetry which seeks to evade the limitations of clarity. In the end, the noun has the last word.
Oh, Dan, there's snaps for me. Thank you for that. Okay, so Andrew first, followed by Lainey.
Just some phrases I wrote down reading the poem and listening to Dan's commentary were wobbly equivalents, oniric writing, soporific flowers, and centrifugal dismounts.
And what do those phrases add up to for you?
Well, I think what's really interesting about this poem, I mean, there are many things that are very interesting about it, is that you kind of begin to get a sense of what guests will eventually start doing more fervently, which is the kind of manipulation of textual space in a really like precise, elegant crystal fashion, a very like kind of Mallarmé treatment. And I think the ending of it is a really like beautiful example of that kind of poetic maneuver.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Andrew. Okay, so let's go to Lainey, followed by Gabby, followed by Al Pascal. I just like saying that name. And then, Dan, if you don't mind, you can get the final word on 20 if you want to add a comment. Lainey.
I'm thinking about, Dan, your comment about the poet has to recover from using the number instead of the noun, and then the noun having the last word, and how this process is somehow akin to how do we find our balance inside a poem, inside a dream. So somehow the process of writing a poem, composing a poem, is a process of recovering the ability to stand up in this different state of consciousness.
Wow, Lainey, that was amazing. Thank you. Gabby, then Al, then Dan.
My thought is like, I think the right way to think about dream logic is that it kind of works in a but also logic, insofar as in a dream, you're able to hold on to two identifications for the same object at the same time. So it's a chair, but it's also my mother, you know, and this is the kind of weird things that like dreams do. And I don't mean that in a kind of like Freudian, I mean quite literally like, oh, I was in a room and I was eating dinner, but the dinner was also ribbons. Like dreams just have this kind of ability to—
They're poetic.
Yeah, they have a kind of way of making things multiple things at once, and feel like when people tell their dreams, they say like, but also a lot, you know, oh, I was talking to someone and it was Al, but it was also Joe Biden. Like it was both, you know, and you have that kind of ability to hold on to both. And I think this poem does that in several ways. I mean, it feels like the images are kind of sewn through in a way where they kind of recur in these kind of surprising ways. And I like that the moment that leads us to the end is like, they are flowers, they are heads, they are castanets. And the poem is interested in holding those three things not as like three different attempts to describe the same thing, but three identifiers that are all true at the same time for whatever that object is. And so I take like Dan's comment about kind of using these different kind of names for the same thing, so a number instead of a noun. That seems related to me, and the way that 20 here means so many different things and feels so mobile is part of the way I think this poem tries to imitate dream logic.
Wow. I mean, I'm going to ask a rhetorical question that, Gabby, you can I don't know how rhetorical it is. I'm going to ask an annoying question, and you can respond if you want. It demonstrates my recency bias, which is generally true because I like modern and contemporary art, and I'm not so cool on the earlier stuff. So there's that bias. Why the hell did it take so long for literature to realize that the dream can be a model for the way we deploy language, or even pigment on?
I don't know if you're gonna like my answer.
Okay, go ahead. You're gonna say it always was there, Al.
I'm not gonna say that. I'm gonna say that psychoanalysis and Freud took over the way that we interpret literature. So that like not only was Freud's interpretation of dream logic so influential to the way people interpret literature insofar as just any kind of psychoanalytic criticism, but it's also important to the way people write literature. So unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your feelings on the matter, I think Freud determined a lot of this for us in the 20th century.
Yeah, I think we should have a sidebar and write a book together on that whole argument, because I actually want to push back on it and say someone like Gertrude Stein, who is more William Jamesian than Freudian, is going to talk about a blind glass and is going to do the dream stuff and is not at all thinking about the easy interpretation. And Verlaine and Mallarmé preceded Freud. So, you know, I guess, yeah. Anyway. Michael. We need, do we have sound on Michael? Yep, okay.
Dan's answer to your question, why did it take literature so long, is because we were asleep.
Dan, I'm going to invite you, I'm going to turn to Al Pascal on the phone, but when we're done with Al, I want to invite Dan to speak autobiographically about out of your own relationship with language, and because we've had extended conversations in which you said that the first year of ModPo, 2012 for you, Stein came as like just a horrible interruption in the clarity that you had been seeking in the earlier poetry, such as imagism, and now you've changed your view. And I wonder how this using dream to create poetry relates to your own feelings about communication and language. That's a giant question, Dan, and I'm really sorry for it. So, Al Pascal, what do you think about all this? How are you?
Hello. I think that on the one hand, this does read obviously as a poem about dreams, and on the other hand, Dan opened talking about sleep being elusive, and I think that it does open feeling like there are these intrusive thoughts that actually kind of have a flavor of insomnia. And sure. I, like the insignificant flamenco dancer, immediately put me in a headspace of feeling like I can't go to sleep because I'm just thinking about this flamenco dancer I saw and I don't know why. Yeah. And for some reason, the fact that the poem opens that way, even though I'm being told constantly in like so many different moments that we are in the dream space, I'm actually thinking that this is someone who is having like waking dreams, or who is just like, oh man, and there goes a bus and I'm like awake again. And oh man, I'm thinking about this again. And so it actually is a really interesting, like non-sleep poem in the way that I have read it. And I wonder if anyone else has had that experience of like sleep is 20 almost feels to me of like this, like, yeah, that sleep is elusive. I can't get to it. Sleep is this far off number. It's not even an experience I can have. And maybe that like cedar that is being described is because it's almost abstract. It's not something that the poet herself is experiencing. And also, I love dream poetry. So, yeah, it's an interesting mix there.
Thank you for that comment, Al. That's fantastic. And also, next time you're here in person, I hope we will mail you T's chapbook. We'll give you a copy, so remind us when you're here next. And thank you for calling. If you'll hang up and then listen to our next responses online, we can get somebody else in. 610-616-3208. Okay, cool. So let us roll the die. Kate, what do you think?
Final word.
Oh, I'm sorry, Dan. Dan, that was a lollapalooza of a question. I'm dying to know what you think.
Dan's answer is joy.
Can you get to the mic? Sorry.
Dan's answer is joy to say that I now understand dreaming as a form of language.
Wow. Very cool.
And he had one more thing that he pre-recorded about.
Okay, but you need to get close to the mic there.
Madison Avenue buses is shocking. You get on a bus to go somewhere, but no Madison Avenue bus goes to Spain or the mountains or wildflowers.
I love that. That's true. Wouldn't it be great to get on a Madison Avenue bus and end up in Granada? That'd be very cool. Okay, let's roll the die and see what poem comes up. This is so random. But Joe's enjoying the randomness of it. Okay, 20. Wait, you rolled 20.
I know I did. We don't have a 20 though. Right?
Well, we just talked about the fucking poem.
Oh my god! Wow.
Isn't that great?
It's great.
Should we talk about 20 some more? Because it's the best poem of the week, I think.
Right.
All right.
Should I keep going?
Yeah.
1.
We don't. Wait. Zach, you didn't tell me there was a 1. I don't have a 1. Usually you're not allowed to do 1 with it. Oh, God.
7.
Erica, what was your choice?
Mount St. Helens.
More Eileen Miles. Okay, good. Let's do that one. Oh, gosh, another meta poem. Okay, I'm going to play Miles. Do I have Miles doing that? I should.
They read it at the fellows visit.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm not seeing it. Anybody got it? Okay, I think I'm just going to look it up.
Is it plus or main?
I'm just going to look it up in pen sound.
There's a poem talk about it in plus.
Okay.
What number
yes,
is it?
Eileen Miles.
6.7. Oh,
I'm just going to go to
section 6.
poem talk to Modpo.
You're in B.
To pen sound. I got it. Okay, here we go. Here's Eileen Miles reciting Mount St. Helens.
Mount St. Helens. Joel Colton died right here. He was a poet. He visited me once in his car with a Polaroid camera. I got it somewhere. Portrait of Eileen by Joel Colton. I know I've got a picture of him. And you can see the landscape traveling by with some poets in their 20s. When I knew Joel Colton, I was younger then. It's a story, said Juliet. Yeah, all that lava. I don't think of him, but I use his lines all the time. I had this poem on my wall for a year. See, they get born on the left, I tell my class. It's a spine. I mean Joel Colton's, a snap of his nerves heading right, the infinity of his line. Born, die. Every time the gesture is complete. Joel Colton, he died here.
Wow. Okay, so I'm going to ask Erica first, since it was your choice, followed by Sophia DuRose, followed by Tina. Would you be willing to make a comment on it? Do you have the text of the poem? Okay, great. You just need a mic. Okay, Erica first. Why did you pick that poem, and what's to say about it?
I picked this poem because there's so many things happening in it that the more I read it, the more baffled I become by the craft of it. So an example of what I mean is the use of punctuation. So in the first stanza, towards the end, Portrait of Eileen by Joel Colton, I know I've got a picture of him. That's all one sentence where it seems like it would naturally kind of be split up a bit more. So line breaks are operating here in a very particular way. And there's also the idea that this is both a meta poem and an elegy or a eulogy almost for Joel Colton, who passed away. And then, there's this lurking figure of the volcano. So, there's just so much happening in a poem that's so skinny that I kind of want to live inside the craft of it and think more about it with other people.
Very nice. And Eileen does the same, because this is a sort of a poem about a friend of a friend. Eileen didn't know Joel Colton well. Joel Colton was Philadelphia-based, and Eileen knew Joel through the community. And so this is more like, I heard that this poet died at Mount St. Helens. So it's a kind of, in the Creeley sense of the company, it's kind of a company poem. And your reference to wanting to read it with others seems right in the spirit of it. Communal elegy. Sophia DuRose, followed by Tina.
Well, I think the opposite of fearless, right, would be spineless. But
Ooh.
This poem asserts that it has many spines. And I think there's a bravery in tackling immensity the immensity of loss, the immensity of the resurrection of a memory or a man. But I think the poem moves through this bravery with difficulty. It stutters and it breaks itself off constantly, and the lines die on the right and then continue again. So I think I just, whenever I read this poem, it seems like it was both, like it both poured out and was difficult to get out at the same time. And I think that's true of grief.
Can I ask you a personal question about your own writing? You wrestle with writing about loss. Does this kind of poem help you, give you some guidance? What have you gotten from it?
I don't know how to answer that. I don't know if I've personally taken anything from this particular poem, but I think I've taken from the poet an appreciation for just the matter-of-factness of saying, like, Joel Colton has died here. I think the presence, the reiterated presence of anyone you've lost in a poem is something I can learn from.
Thank you. Tina, your thought on this?
Hello. This poem makes me think about how we attach meaning to something of a life lost too young, and how we attempt to memorialize them with a mountain, something that will never die. And our hopes to be memorialized ourselves can be seen in our attempts to memorialize others while we still can, in any way, often through poetry.
Thank you, Tina. Fantastic. Okay, we are going to look at the comment stream, and then we're going to play a different game. So brace yourselves, everyone, because you came here for the games, Kate.
That's right.
Rolling a 20. What do you got going there?
Susan Thomas says, I love the short lines in Mount St. Helen. Jane Ward, talking about grief is difficult. This poem does help me in a way. The matter of fact ending anyway.
Sophia?
Matthew Coben said the poem works in contrast to the closed narrative, a timeline by making Colton live in shared memory.
And shout out to Matthew, who's been posting in the later weeks of the course a lot of really interesting things. Really appreciate your involvement. Yes, okay, so Allie, welcome. Allie Castleman, hello. Glad you're joining us. We're having a lot of fun. What's going to happen now is we are going to, and Allie is going to be assigned number 16, and we're going to roll the dice, and we're going to ask if you come up, I want you to take a line or a phrase from any of the poems this week, not just the one you suggested, and say something about it so that the texture of the New York School gets put into the record of this webcast. Okay? So, Kate, you're going to do a lot of rolling now. Okay? Everybody get ready. We need a line or a phrase from any poem.
8.
8. Max, you're up.
Just one line or one phrase?
One line or one phrase, exactly. Hurry.
Yeah.
No pressure.
Yeah, I'm going to do it from just walking around. The longest way is the most efficient way.
Yeah. What does he mean by that, Max?
Well, I mean, you could write an entire book on what he means by that.
Yeah.
It's a celebration of inefficiency in a kind of counterintuitive way, right? He's talking about the pleasure that you derive from not necessarily trying to aim a certain goal or get to a certain place, but rather in walking around, right? And kind of in getting distracted and going on tangents and letting your mind wander and following a certain dream logic and kind of, following paths that you don't normally follow.
And for John Ashbery, that was the very definition of the role of the poet, and it became an efficiency because he wrote poem after poem after poem by just walking
Yeah,
around.
sure.
Yeah,
Yeah, totally.
fantastic. All right, thanks. Let's see who comes up now on the die. Kate.
11.
11. That is Joe. A line or phrase. Hurry.
Mine is also in Just Walking Around. Come see it, come not for me, but it. And the reason that I love this line is because it reminds us of our Mod Po class, actually. And a week ago, we were talking about triangulation and how important it is to gather around anything. And that collective and being together is what poetry is about. And this line really reminds me of that.
So that triangulation was the object that is the poem that convenes us, and then there's the reader, and there's this poet, and all kinds of. So that's the triangulation, and it's a pedagogical triangulation. So this poem is, in that sense, what do we call it?
Meta-pedagogical poem.
A meta-pedagogical poem. Okay, roll the die. 20.
14.
14. That is Drew. Pick a poem. Let's get a mic to Drew. Word or phrase from a poem.
To meet as far this morning from the world as agreeing with it.
To meet as far this morning from the world as agreeing with it. Some trees, John Ashbery. You want to say anything about that?
Yeah, no, I like this. I mean, I've been talking about this phrase about
pretty
this
much
poem
nonstop,
but this phrase is just like so romantic to me. It's like, and like to meet by arranging by chance, right? Like, because like you and this other entity or person will walk away the same distance from the world, that same distance of which you disagree with the world, and meet there, and then you can share those thoughts. It's just like, I really like.
So you find agreement and communing out of disagreement.
Yes.
Beautiful. Thank you. Another roll. This is good. I like this.
18.
Don't have one.
12.
12. Sanvi had to leave.
Is 14 the highest number?
No, 16.
Oh, 9.
9. Gabby. It's a day like any other.
February, right?
That's right. February Skylar.
That's for me vying for the greatest poem of the week. What moves you so much about that?
Well, I feel like the New York School in total is doing this weird thing where it seems like they are writing about the ordinary, the everyday, but I think what they're finding is that everydayness is a rather abstract thing. I feel this is really true about Ashbery and Skylar especially, that actually being ordinary is kind of alien and familiar. And so that end of that line is the end of that poem being that line is such a strong contrast to the rest of it. But I really like what's happened to the word it in the few lines before it, where, you know, when you say it's a hot day, the it is such a vague signifier, like it, the day, like the time of the day, the space of the day, the climate of the day. It's sort of just this kind of weird thing that we say in Romance languages. But yeah, I just think it's great.
It is a great poem. Okay, let's roll it again.
7.
7, that's Erica. I think, did Erica go? No. Erica.
I would pick O'Hara. The day lady died, everyone and I stopped breathing, which is just, I feel like a quintessentially New York School way to end a poem with the gesturing outwards that's incredibly intimate.
Yeah. And it's a sort of old poetic pun on aspiration, inspiration. So the inspiration is the inspiring, the respiring is the breathing out. And there's the breathing of the poetic meter, and then there's the jazz as well that gets, so it's all happening there. I wonder if, Michael, would you play Dan's comment on the day lady died for us, please?
I want to mention some connections between the main body of the poem and the ending. The poem begins in an obituary way with the precise day and time. Stillwagon is sort of a name for a hearse, but anyway she doesn't check his balance, but he remembers having to lean on the bathroom door to keep his balance while listening to Billie Holiday. Then he and the world trade places with her at the end because she is whispering, and it is O'Hara and the other listeners who stop breathing.
Wow, I've never heard anybody interpret Stillwagon as a hearse. That is pretty great. Thank you. I'm going to break the die game and ask Allie. Hello, Allie. You have a word or phrase you want to, or a line?
Well, I was also going to do It's a Day Like Any Other because that's just so New York school. And so my kind of cop out to stay in that mode is the beginning of The Day Lady Died. Erica did the end, so I'll do It is 12:20 in New York on a Friday. Because that happens to be the specific. And I feel like so much of what is going on in these poems are poets are kind of picking out a day that begins like any other. And then it happens to be kind of describing the dailiness of that, but also the kind of combination of things happening that actually can't be repeated. And you never know when something is going to happen that makes you remember that day forever, or that gives it significance, or that transforms it into a day unlike any other.
Yeah.
And so the very thin line between It's a Day Like Any Other and It's the Day Lady Died, or even like It's This Gorgeous February Day where I'm having this kind of epiphanic moment, I think is just, it's what I love. One of the things I love about this week.
Yeah. And the present tense becomes a continuous present. What better a way to write an elegy, or as Dan put it, obituary, Dan's reference to the beginning of the poem, but using not past tense. This person who died was this, did this, established this, built this, made this, and is no longer. But this poem gives us an is, the continuous present of Stein, updated to this moment that will always be the moment that Lady died. Beautiful. Okay, roll the die, please. Kate, you're so good at this. Are you having fun?
Yes. 2.
2. Andrew.
I'm just going to keep talking about Barbara Guest, and the line I chose is from The Blue Stairs, and it's secret platforms.
Can you, I think a lot of folks don't know that poem. Can you give us a little bit of sort of a basic Wikipedia, not Wikipedia, but an overview sense of what's going on there? She's partly talking about some stairs in a museum, an art museum, but there's more.
I guess it is in Mod Po Plus, so it's sort of an outlier, but yeah, I mean, I think there's a kind of architectural scene maybe that's being inscribed, but there's also a turn inward to a kind of reflexive enunciation about enunciation, I think, and about the kind of mystical curvature of poetic utterance.
Yes.
I think it's also a kind of antidote to the chattiness of the New York school as a predominant tonality. And I feel like it gives us a little bit of mysticism and, secrecy. I think there's there's something to be said for that kind of.
That's great. Can you say more about the way in which Guest, in this poem or generally, is mildly rebuking her colleagues for the kind of easy chattiness and in favor of something less revealing and more mystical? I mean, that's such an interesting way of thinking about Guest's relationship to the New York school.
Well, these kinds of art historical retrospective groupings, I mean, in the New York school in particular, I think always have their kind of epistemological weaknesses. In this case, I think that Guest's work is very strange, somewhat like aristocratic in its orientation, and but yet there's a kind of delving into like not knowing, and also a kind of a poetic writing that is not a narrative, and it's not a representation, it's a kind of illumination, I think.
Yeah, that's so good. It's not just not narrative. It's not anti-narrative. It's not non-narrative. Like 20, that poem is doing something other. It's not telling a story that for O'Hara would be kind of a non-story that turns into a story. It's not the instruction manual. I want to break the pattern of die throwing and ask Lainey to read another Barbara Guest poem, There Was a Poem, and then I'm going to ask a couple of people to respond to it. I would like to ask Allie and Jason and Dave briefly each to comment on this poem. And I realize that you may not have looked at this poem, and it is in Modpo Plus.
Yes, sorry, I thought I had
It's
it.
called
but
There Was a Poem
I need to find it.
by Barbara Guest.
Let's see. Wow. All my papers are falling down. Here we go. There was a poem with the moon in it traveling across the bridge in one of those fragile trains carrying very small loads like moons that one could never locate anywhere else. The Mississippi was bright under the bridge like a sun because the poem called itself the sun also, 2 boxcars on the bridge crossing the river.
Did you want to, I'm going to ask Jason, Allie, and Dave to respond, but did you want to focus us with a question, Lainey?
I did. So what is being said here about a poem? What a poem can do, what a poem can contain or be?
Fabulous question. All right, who wants to take that on? Allie, do you want to start?
I would love another minute to dwell on it, but
Okay,
I'll try.
you can if you want.
Well, there is a poem with a moon in it traveling across the bridge. That's how we start, and by the end, we know that the Mississippi was bright under the bridge like a sun, because the poem called itself the sun also. So if the poem calls itself the sun merely because the poem is telling us that that is so, like we only get the introduction of that knowledge in that line, and it carries a moon in it. A poem can be all things, but it can also like shift what it is temporally as it goes along. It can kind of transform. It does transform as it is being read or written.
Yes. Nice, thank you. Because the poem called itself The Sun also. I love the power of that. Jason, a quick thought on this poem?
Yeah, well, it's I guess metapoetic. It's very interesting that this is a poem about a poem, because it's not saying this is a poem with a moon in it. It's saying
Exactly.
there was a poem.
There is some other poem.
Yeah, there's another poem out there, and yeah, I mean, I just like downloaded this eye exercise app onto my phone, and one thing it has you do is hold out your thumb, and you're supposed to like look at your thumb intensely and then look at an object far away and then back at your thumb, and so it's like your eyes are flexing their focus, and you can feel it physically, like when you move from the close object to the far object back and forth. It's like your eye muscles are moving, and this poem to me does the same thing. It's moving our attention to these words as a poem, to these fairly precise objects that are named by the poem, so they're both within and without the poem, like the Mississippi, like the 2 boxcars, are simultaneously existing in this vibrating kind of way, inside and outside the poem.
Love that. Thank you. Dave Poplar, and then we'll go back to Lainey for a thought on this because you chose the poem.
I didn't even get the title of the poem, so I don't have the text in front of me, so I have no idea.
Okay, well, we'll pass and turn to Lainey. Thoughts on this? Why'd you pick this for us?
I love this poem. It's just, and of course it's very meta, which we love to talk about. But I also feel like there's a sense of humor in the poem because it seems to be also be making fun of a more conventional way that a poem might have a moon in it or a sun in it in an overly
Cliched.
sentimental way.
Yeah.
And this, but it also, it's like the poem is moving, the poem is crossing, like the poem is just doing all these things that it's funny to think of it doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She's very playful. Okay. Dave Poplar, can you go into the subforum and tell us if there is a question or comment there that you want to convey to us? And then I'm going to ask, and while you're doing that, I'm going to ask people who are chatting away in the YouTube comment stream to do what we just did, which is to pick a phrase or a line and choose it and put it into the stream. We won't be able to take everyone's suggestions, but I want to turn to a few. Then we're going to have a big grand round of final words, which is another way of saying everybody gets a chance to talk about the New York School. So while you guys are doing that, chat stream, I'll turn to Dave. Anything in the forum we should look at?
Yeah, there's a few. I'll read a couple. Debjani Chatterjee asks, I'm wondering how and why the cataloging of time and being in the present continuous became so vital to the New York School poets. And then a longer question by Suzanne Miller. When we talk about the New York School poets, we tend to focus on parataxics, absurdity, step by step, but I see another similarity, and I don't know if it's a quirk of these poems included in ModPo and ModPo Plus, or if it's a characteristic of the school. Many of these poems seem to be nested. There are so often embedded narratives or reminiscences or dreams. The instruction manual, February, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, all come to mind. Even 20 can be interpreted as nested. Given that these poems are so varied in content, yet all assigned to week 7, are these like Russian nesting dolls here because of what these poets had in common, or because of what Al finds intriguing in poems or close reading?
You're calling me out, Suzanne. This is a curated course for sure. When Lainey says, well, we like meta poetry, that's true of a lot of us, but, you know, it is a focus of ModPo, and ModPo is not, you know, there's a lot of poets who are not doing meta poetry who are in the course. But we can turn any poem into a meta poem by virtue of being excluded or included. I'm looking at Kate, and Kate's like, don't look at me. I don't want to talk about this. Dan Bergman, would you, Michael, play Dan's comment on the instruction manual? It's relevant to Suzanne's comment about the nesting, because this is the classic nesting poem, and you'll have to bring the mic down to the iPad.
I love this poem. I read it as continuing a tradition that begins with Homer's description of the shield of Achilles. 2 cities radiant on the shield appear, the image one of peace and one of war. Here sacred pomp and genial feast delight, and solemn dance, and hymeneal rite. Along the street the new-made brides are led, with torches flaming, to the nuptial bed, the youthful dancers in a circle bound to the soft flute and cithern's silver sound. Through the fair streets the matrons in a row stand in their porches and enjoy the show.
Wow.
Alexander Pope translation.
Wow, Dan, thank you for that. Wow, Ashbury. Okay, so what's happening in the comment stream? Did some people have suggestions for... Okay, go ahead. What do we got?
Miranda Jubb says, I lost the prejudice of paradise, which is, of course, from Eve of Easter, Bernard Mayer.
Eve of Easter. Nice. Sophia?
From USA versus Cuba, I'm always running late, I'm always running.
Nice. Any others?
There were plenty of others when we were doing this initially, but I can't scroll up. Hi.
Your scrolling capacities are limited?
We have Where's Sardines from Jane Ward from Why I'm Not a Painter.
Why I'm Not a Painter. Fantastic. Okay, so now we're going to turn to expansive final words. Everybody gets a chance to just say something about the New York School Week that they care about, or bring up something that hasn't been said today, or to speak to some comment that someone made that you really appreciated and didn't have a chance to commend. So let's just go. We're not going to use the dice, so let's go with Max is first, followed by Erica. Final thoughts.
Yeah, I was thinking a lot earlier today about the use of the present tense, the whole I do this, I do that, I can, and so forth. And the way that the present tense, I'm just trying to think about what the present tense means for this poetics, right? And it seems like it's about constructing, we've talked about this in different ways, but I think it's something that's really worth thinking about a bit more. It's like it's about constructing this moment. It's about constructing an idea of the present, right? That's historically important in the 50s, 60s, and 70s when these poets are writing in New York. I mean, if Davy Niddle were here, David would probably fill us in on all the things that are happening in New York City at this time, right? The way the city is being changed, the way the built environment is being affected, just general fears of apocalypse and annihilation from the Cold War, all these things, right? And you have this poetics that's very invested in the present, what it means to be present, what it means to think about the present, feel the present, in some ways preserve the present, preserve the moment.
Yeah, great. That's such a great point, Max. And there's been a political or ideological bias against presentness. The cliche about the late 50s through the early 70s is that it was like a me generation. And so present tense, a real present bias. But in fact, it turns out to be the opposite, in my opinion anyway, in the opinion of many historians, intellectual historians. It's turned out to be an expression of communality and of exchange, to have a present that includes other people. I think we need to reverse that historical judgment about the so-called me generation and present tense. Thank you, Max. Who did I say was up next? I can't remember. Did we have an on deck? I think it was Erica. Erica's on now, and Sophia DeRose is on deck.
Yeah, I mean, to continue some of what Max was saying, but to take it in a slightly different direction, I'm also thinking about this question of presentness and the continuous present. And, I'm admittedly still thinking about Eileen Myles, who's a writer I could probably think about forever. And, the other thing that strikes me in some of the poems we have this week is the combination of present tense with a certain allegiance to the way people actually speak. Eileen likes to use the phrase chatty abstraction to talk about somebody like John Ashbery. But I also think that there's this very interesting collapse between the familiar and the abstract, or even like the personal and the sublime, that happens in these poems through language that doesn't feel exclusive as far as like the level of the diction goes. And for me, that feels like an incredibly important political statement that's also documenting a moment, as Max was saying.
Wow. You people are so smart. That was so great. So thank you, Erica. Sophia is up, and then I'm going to give Gabby a chance. And since Gabby is a special guest, Gabby gets to go on at some length. In other words, whatever you... Gabby, you're a special guest. You can say whatever you want at whatever length. But first, more briefly, Sophia. Okay. That didn't work out. Sorry.
I'm thinking of the line from February. I can't get over how it all works in together.
Makes me cry, that line.
Well, and I was thinking about it specifically when we were talking about Eileen Myles and connecting any two things. And my reaction to that line is like, why should we get over it? How can we even? I feel like that's what novels do, like make you get over the logic of how things just work.
TV shows, it's done.
Yeah, and so what I appreciate most about the New York School Week is that I'm not being asked to like get over the appreciation for how I live and how I get to live. I can just appreciate it.
Yes. And you know, if you're in your apartment and you're not going out very much and you're looking out the window and at your desk, then how joyous it is that you can't get over the way things that you're looking at, even if you're separated from the world, connect together. It's a version of Eileen Miles just saying I can connect anything, you know. That's great, Sophia. Gabby extensively is up, and I'm going to ask Dan also extensively as much as you like to offer final thoughts as a special guest as well. Gabby, thank you for joining us today,
Thank you for
Gabby. We
having
miss
me. Glad
you
to be here.
every
Also,
week.
My cat may appear. She's sort of like curious about voices. I was gonna say, I don't know how extensive I'll be, but I guess what I'm left with after our conversation, I think we've done a very good job of accounting for this style. The kind of philosophy of art that it takes up, the sort of phenomenology of the everyday that it takes up, its sort of weird mix of familiarity and abstraction. I guess one thing that we haven't talked much about is that this is a very primarily gay poetic movement, one that is really founded on the innovations of gay writers. And I think we should ask ourselves, and I don't have an answer for this, like, what is it about, let's say, gayness in 1960s, 70s New York that would not only produce this kind of style, but make it feel relevant, helpful, and you know, propagate itself? Why does this become a movement? It's something I don't have an immediate answer for, but I want to bring that question of desire into the room.
It's a topic that you care a lot about, and your book Madness, you know, that poet goes through a phase of New York School, no?
I think you're kind of right. I mean, the daily is a real thematic question in that book, and I do actually, you know what? You brought this up. I think you're kind of right that I do actually try to figure out why in that book such a style would be helpful to a question of desire.
I just really love, Gabby, your feeling that this reading of that movement or this focus is productive in a sort of, I dare say, almost like regular way, like things are being made out of this thing that would have been central to culture in the city, but would have been surely marginalized in the outer precincts of poetry making at the time. And yet it's not like its radicalism is dated now because it doesn't have to be radical because there's so much acceptance, but it actually creates some really regular things to happen in literary history. How does that sound to you?
No, I think that's totally right, and I appreciate that gloss. I also want to say I feel like of the movements that we encounter in this class, the New York School feels like the one that people are still really ventriloquizing from. I mean, I feel like contemporary poetry still feels so close to this kind of work, more so than, let's say, the Beats, or more so than, say, the Harlem Renaissance. Like, this one feels still very alive in a way. Not that those others aren't, but I keep feeling like I meet and read the sort of successors of the New York School. They keep coming up.
Fantastic, Gabby. Thank you so much. Okay, we're going to turn to Dan for some final thoughts, and then on deck will be Allie Castleman.
So Dan has...
You need to use the mic.
Dan has two things that he wants to comment on. The first one is on variations on a theme by William Carlos Williams, and there are three little pieces to this one. Here's the first one.
You guys in the video do a great job of showing the way Coke draws attention to William's misogynistic abuse of power. I just want to add that once Flossie opened the refrigerator and saw the plums gone, she would have known what happened and who ate them. So the point of the poem is to share not the facts but the poet's feelings. The poem comes alive with the word probably, which tells us that Williams imagines that Flossie was saving the plums. To me at least, it seems that William's fantasy of her disappointment adds a lot to his sensual enjoyment of the plums. Koch does a great job of teaching us how Williams' poem works, but he sacrifices the speaker imagining what is going on with the addressee. The money you had been saving. Not the plums you were probably saving.
And I'm going to read the third one because I don't think the computerized voice gets the cadence right. Williams would not have appreciated my drawing attention to his feelings. Forgive me. But the crime was not a crime until Williams apologized.
That's so good, Dan. Hey, Dan, we talked about, I think it was when did I see you guys? March? April? When did we come out to see you? What month? I don't even remember. Anyway, Dan, we talked then about your joining the table, being here, and here you are. So do you have any thoughts about having joined the table?
Means the world to me. I've wanted this since 2012.
Yeah, okay. So there's some applause for Dan. Thank you for...
Wait a minute, sit down.
Thank you for...
And Dan asked me to end with this comment about a favorite line. It's also Barbara Guest.
I love the sky sinks slowly instead of the sun sinks slowly. The sky is usually associated with endless possibilities, as in, the sky's the limit, means there is no limit, but the sky is also one of the first things God created by separating it from the earth. Postmodern poetry seeks to undo separations.
Lovely. Thank you again, Dan, and Michael and Meredith for making the trip. Okay, so Allie is up and Joe is on deck.
I'm just so happy that I got to join for a little bit. And I want to say, Dan, I'm almost surprised it's your first time at the table because I just feel like you've been at the table metaphorically like since 2012. And in terms of, I'm thinking about the comment, I forget who made this comment about these poems being nested, and is there something is there an inherent connection there, or is it just kind of like a choice? And I guess I'm thinking about, both our conversation about the present, continuous present, and what Sophia said about not getting over it, and how so much of what New York School of Poets recognize is that, like, there's no way to be in the present without having the past and the future also in the present. So every other tense, if you will, is always kind of nested in the present moment.
Amazing.
And part of what getting over something, another way of saying that is like, just move forward, like keep going, like go in one direction. And I think part of what I love so much about these poems and these poets is their willingness to say, like, no, we're gonna be like in a little circle of time right now, and we're gonna create the circle of time. And the like little pause there is the poem.
That's so great. A capacious present, not just the present that marks the present moment. Joe is up. Did Dan have a response to Allie's comment about welcoming you to the table?
He said, that's the nicest thing anyone ever said to me.
Oh, my God. Thank you, Dan. It's true. Okay, Joe is up, and Dave Poplar's on deck.
Gabby's comment about gayness and how it contributes to the New York School of Poetry was really interesting to me. And while obviously I do not have any kind of an answer, I was thinking earlier about how the New York School of Poetry has a lot to say about unconventional love of the conventional. And I'm wondering if maybe there was this longing for recognizing that perhaps what they were doing was radical, but that it shouldn't be, and it was unconventional love that is conventional. And I wonder if there's a connection there between this idea that that gayness was not accepted at the time. It was there was a longing, maybe some kind of internal longing in the movement there of appreciating just the fact that it's normal and natural. And so that was perhaps drawing them to speak on the details of their life in this way. That I think there was a phrase used about familiar abstractions. And I think it's all kind of interconnected. And thank you for that comment, because it really got me thinking.
And thank you, Joe. That's great. We're now asking for brief final words because we're heading up against the time limit. Not that we have a strict time limit, but we like to do this in 90 minutes. So we're going to go to Dave and then Andrew.
Just a quick observation. When you were asking for us to pick out a phrase that's emblematic of the New York School, I picked from Frank O'Hara's A Step Away from Them, the line, "Neon in daylight is a great pleasure." And I picked that because it's just so cool in the way the New York School seems, at least to me, to have such a connection to William Carlos Williams and poets like that who have broken ground by recognizing how there's beauty in not just the natural world, but everything in the world, including the artificial. So I think it's cool to see that through line.
Yeah, I love that. The artificial that's meant to be artificial at night, in the daytime. I mean, double artificial. Okay, Andrew, followed by Jason.
Just wanted to quickly shout out my favorite Barbara Goethe book, which is called Quill Solitary Apparition, and has a beautiful cover by Etel Adnan and a blurb by Meme Bersenberger. Yeah, totally pull up, download it, buy it.
And thank you, Andrew, and others for promulgating the idea that people should be reading Barbara Guest in and out of this context of this week. So thank you for that. Jason's up, and Kate is on deck. I think you're muted, Jason.
Sorry. Okay. Yeah, I totally agree with Gabby that it's important to think about the stakes of O'Hara and Ashbery's, I don't know what I might say, queer charm, like their poetics of camp irony and their kind of general insouciance. And I wonder, because when I moved to New York, I expect, having read O'Hara and Ashbery, I expected there to be this wild, robust queer poetic community of, and a lot of the people who we look at in the further generations, and Guest and Koch are not themselves homosexual or LGBT plus, but I wonder what the experience of O'Hara and Ashbery adds up to in terms of their poetics that not only infuses their writing, but then gives permission to a lot of other writers to follow kind of new trajectories. And I'm thinking tonight in my office hours at 8, we can look at maybe.
You just went mute again somehow.
Oh.
Frozen.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, so I'm thinking about maybe peeking into Susan Sontag's Notes on Camp and look at the Mabpa Plus juxtaposition of O'Hara's poem At the Old Place and Lytle Shaw's kind of Brokeback Mountain-esque macho response to
O'Hara. He calls
O'Hara
it a homophobic translation.
The At the Old Place homophobic translation of O'Hara.
I love that. I just want to comment as we turn to Kate that the office hours have turned into ongoing seminars and workshops. This is the best thing that's going on in ModPo. I do think the webcasts are pretty cool, but what's really cool is that 6 or 7 or 8 people gather around and have these kind of free and open seminars. It's great. Kate, it's Kate Week. We're so happy to have you here. And so please give us a final thought.
My final thought is I feel very fortunate to be sitting at this table with all of you and everyone on Zoom, everyone in the room, Dan, Michael, The conversation is wonderful. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. We appreciate you, so it's mutual. Thank you, Kate. Are you having a good time during Kate Week so far?
It's the best.
Okay, cool. Tomorrow we're going to have some more fun. Lainey Brown, final thoughts.
Kate said it. I'm just really happy to be here, and it's so nice to see Gabby. We miss you, Gabby.
Yeah. Come back. Surprise us.
And I'm really moved by Dan's comments, and I tried to write it down exactly what you said, but I didn't get it exactly. But postmodern poetry seeks to undo separation, something like that. And I was looking at Joe's face, which is just making a poem with your face, just responding to the comments. So it's what we're doing. So
it's what we're doing.
I'm glad to be here.
My final thought is a shout out to Kanan Natasan, who's in Singapore. It's just, we went over, I think we're now over 86,000 people enrolled in the course. And Kanan has been with us since 2012, but has been away. And so I just want to read Kanan's new reintroduction to the Introduce Yourselves thread, which we thought would be done, but more people keep introducing themselves. So we're going to end today with thank you to everyone, particularly Zach and Chris and Magda for doing the tech. You guys don't get enough shout outs. To Dan and his family for coming such a long distance. Gabby for hanging out. You should have come from Chicago here to hang out with us, but that's okay. This is second best. And Kate, happy Kate Week. And so we're going to go out with Kanan Natasan, who proves once again that MOOCs, they're like something for life. It's not like you dip in and do a thing and then you go away because you learn something. Hello from Singapore. I'm sure I wrote an introduction, unlike this one, in 2012 and submitted an essay on Emily Dickinson, but I lost steam in completing the course, in quotes, after Gertrude Stein, but kept coming back for samplings at will. I was so happy that, unlike the courses on Coursera back then, all the materials were still available on the platform after the end of the course. So I consumed ModPo poems, discussions, a la carte all these years. Before ModPo, I never read poetry for pleasure, but now I cannot have enough poetry. I have these immersive bouts of ModPo, from which I have to force myself out to return to my instruction manuals, referring to a job that's a little less exciting than poetry. I am most grateful for the generosity, as someone mentioned here, of this course and its people and all the co-learners. It is a shame that it never occurred to me that I should peek into the discussion forums. And this is something I discovered recently, and that too, out of an insatiable desire to talk about poetry, to listen, read to people talking about poetry. That's the level I've reached now from my association with ModPo. Nevertheless, I'm glad I did it now. I am also an active proponent of the idea of, quote, ModPo for life, unquote. Trying to get my friends and my daughter to sign up for the course, I wanted to write an introduction here, lest I surprise people by springing up in random threads. In keeping with the mood of week 7, I look forward to touch, love, and explain. Thank you, Kanan, for being with us since 2012. Thank you, Dan, for being with us since 2012. And all of you wonderful folks, New York School Week, fantastic. Go to those office hours and have a good time. Love you all. See you soon.
Dan says thank you, Al, for being with us since 2012.
Oh, yes. Thank you, Dan.